Hey guys, what's up? Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/eggs show. That's EGGSSHOW. Audible has more than 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or just about any device you can imagine. As Eggs listeners, you can download a free audiobook today by visiting audibletrial.com/eggs show.
He come out 6'7" tall, bang ding ding, one star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. It is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. Cars broke down, I missed the bus that runs at 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right under Jumbo's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just a perfect day. It's just a perfect day. No, 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 no,
Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Today's guest is Mark E. Green, author of Activators, a CEO's Guide to Clearer Thinking and Getting Things Done. Mark is a speaker, strategic advisor, and coach to CEOs and executive teams worldwide. He has addressed, coached, and advised thousands of business leaders, helping them unlock their potential and teaching them how to do the same for their teams. His integrity, direct style, and powerful intuition accelerate team performance, distribution of decision-making, productivity, revenue, and profitability. Mark's clients report significantly lower stress, reduced time consumed by business, and vastly improved quality of life. He's a core advisor to Gravitas Impact Premium Coaches and a mentor to coaches worldwide, an active contributor to programs and content for their global ecosystem. So, without any further ado, allow me to introduce our guest, Mark Green. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Ryan, Mike, great to be with you.
Likewise, thanks for making the time for us.
Yeah,
You
really
bet.
glad to have you. So I guess let's just dive right into this. We're actually getting a little bit of a late start, so let's just start by starting at the beginning. So a lot of the guests that we have on this show, we typically like to sort of start with a little bit of backstory. You know, who you are, where you come from, and what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Chappaqua, New York, about 55 minutes to the north of New York City. Very middle class. My dad was a solo practitioner podiatrist, and my mom was a school teacher, elementary school teacher. I'm the middle of three boys, and went to college in the Midwest, Washington University in St. Louis, and then had the opportunity to begin my career out in LA, working for a company that outsourced technology in the banking industry. And that was the first decade of my career was working for that company in LA, then in St. Louis, and then bouncing into New York.
Not trying to date you, but how long ago was that?
Well, let's see. I graduated college in 1988 and worked for this company until about 1998.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to figure out what kind of technology you were working with.
It was mainframe, big iron computer technology that ran all kinds of bank accounts and general ledger and ATM machines and all that kind of stuff.
Fun.
Yeah. Well, I was more on the relationship side, but it was a great experience. It was a management training program right out of college. So they taught us how to program and then kind of moved us where we wanted to go in the business. So I was there till 1998, got laid off, which is a story I can unpack separately depending on which way the conversation goes, and used the next 3 years to really sort of figure out what I was interested in doing for the remainder of my career. And out of all of that came my leadership development training company, which I launched in 2003. And that evolved over the years into the coaching practice and lifestyle I have today.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because basically I didn't go through the technological side as you did. I have sort of an art and design background, but nonetheless, I sort of was thrust into a position like that too, where I had begun life working for this agency. I actually relocated for them. And then after a few years' time was laid off and basically back out on my own, trying to figure out my way too. So it's really interesting, the similarities here. So yeah, why don't you take a minute and sort of unpack that? You said there's a little bit more to that story.
Yeah, as I was preparing for the podcast, I was thinking about different gifts of learning that I received over the course of my journey, my life. And
I like that you call them gifts.
Yeah, and there's 6 of them that I noted. And again, we don't have to get to all of them, but this was certainly one of them, this layoff. And the layoff gave me the gift of choosing how I react to events. Okay. So I was working for this technology company, managing their outsourced relationship with a bank in New York City at the time. And I was in over my head. And I didn't really admit it to anybody, but I knew it. And I knew I wasn't doing a great job. And so I became a relatively easy target for a layoff. So technically I was laid off, but I knew at the time that I was laid off because I was really weak in the role. And this is after, 10 years with this company, getting hired right off a college campus, going through this super high profile management training program and all of this kind of stuff. So it came as a real blow to me. And I made the decision very quickly that this layoff was going to be the best thing that ever happened to me. And I even went so far as to articulate that to my boss as we were having the conversation around, hey, you're not going to be here anymore, and here's the package, and here's what we're going to provide you with, and all that kind of stuff. And my parting words were, this may sound strange to you, and I can quote this because I remembered exactly. This was 20 years ago now. I said, this may sound strange to you, but I feel like you just gave me a bouquet of flowers and wished me well for the rest of my journey. Like I just feel like you gave me a gift.
Yeah,
okay?
I love that.
And I chose in that moment, I just had this feeling that it was the right thing, even though I was really hurt. I mean, really hurt and upset. And at the time I had two young kids, and we have three now, but at the time I had 2. And so again, it just was a big deal. So I went on from there, and that's where I started to gain experience in the small business world. And without getting into all the detail, I worked for a couple of different firms in marketing and sales and technology, and got a really good feel for small business, whereas this other company I had been working for was this giant company. And that all led me to launch my my coaching practice, right? So here's the part of the story that brings it all together. Last year, 2018, 20 years after I was laid off, I received an email from a client of mine. And just for listeners' perspective, I'm a growth coach. So I work with CEOs and their leadership teams running high growth mid-market firms. And to me, a mid-market firm is a company with somewhere between $25 and $400 million in revenue. So my clients run the range from, maybe 50 to 100 employees on the low end to well over 1,000 or multi-thousand employees on the high end. So wow. Just for perspective as to where I'm at right now. So I get an email from one of my clients late last year, late 2018, and the email says, I'd like to introduce you to a friend of mine who is interested in hiring a coach. And it was the CEO of the bank
that you got laid off from.
Now, it wasn't the same. It was the same bank. It wasn't the same CEO. So 20 years later, essentially, I'll close it all out. I was hired to coach the CEO and the executive team of that bank.
Huh. That's coming full circle right there.
Yeah, it really is. That's cool. Awesome.
Okay, and so once a month, I'm in the boardroom with this team now as their coach, and I'm not telling the story to position myself in any highfalutin way here, but to close the circle around this concept of underscoring the importance of choosing how you react to something and how that can play itself out literally over decades in ways that you just don't understand. And so that was my gift from the layoff early in my career.
You know, it's interesting. We have sort of a friend of the show, this guy named Chris Do, that is he's in the creative space, but he does a lot of coaching and things like that. And he has something similar to this where he basically says, you know, anytime something goes sideways, you just say congratulations and then find the other side, you know, so whatever it is. And so it's really cool that you sort of had the thought to do that, you know, and so many people, you know, and as I mentioned, being a layoff victim myself, you know, when I went home, my wife was having a conniption fit, but my inclination was, no, we're going to be fine. Like I was, you know, already working outside of work. Like, I mean, this now gives me the opportunity to build on what I've been working on, you know? So for me, it ended up being a great opportunity, much like you're saying. And so, you know, I had the temperament that's how I handled it, but had it just been my wife's layoff, I don't know how much she'd have gone that way. And so it is really interesting, just that idea. And maybe you can even speak to it a little bit. Like, what gave you that confidence? Why did you feel so good about it?
I've always been wired toward the optimistic, and I would say probably a little bit more externally than internally. In other words, I might not feel totally optimistic, but I would always put out that all was well, which by the way caused another issue that I wasn't always willing to ask for help when I needed it, and I learned that lesson along the way as well, right? But I was always wired that way, so I only knew one way to react to that event, and it was to categorize it as a great thing, and then to move on. And it's actually one of the 8 activators in my book, Activators, and it's called Leverage Your Past. And it's this idea that events that happen to us, once the event has occurred, every memory that we have about an event is just a story we tell ourselves. That's it. It's a story. We make it up. I mean, it's true. And for proof of this, you got to find 2 people who took the same vacation at the same time, like a couple friend of yours who, let's say, went to, I don't know, Key West for a week of vacation or took a cruise together, and they come back from the trip and you sit down and you say, so how was the trip? And one person says, oh man, the trip was amazing. The weather was great. The service was fantastic. And the other person says, you know, the food could have been better. And by the way, the ship wasn't that clean. And yeah, it was an okay vacation. They had the same experience.
Yeah, no, it's true.
We're together.
Yeah, it really is just all about perspective. And it is sort of that outlook, whichever you've got, whether it's positive or negative, it's sort of whatever outlook you bring to the table.
Exactly. So the extension of that concept is then if we acknowledge that a memory is essentially a story we tell ourselves, then guess what you can do with your memories? You can reframe them. You can discover new aspects about an event that happened in the past just by thinking about it that can cause you to reframe the memory. And it's a really powerful thing because a lot of times we act in the present because of how we remember events in the past, and it doesn't always serve us. And so by knowing this, you can actually go back and say, well, you know, it's like I've been bitten before kind of memory, so I'm not going to go do this again. And yet it's the thing that you're not doing again that's probably holding you back from whatever you're pursuing. And you can actually go back and reframe the memory. And so I created a tool to do just that and help you leverage your past in a positive way instead of have it hold you back. And it's all just a matter of choice.
Yeah, no, it's so funny because like so many of us feel powerless when it comes to these kinds of things. You know, we feel like that, you know, somebody's will has been imposed on us or whatever, and that we're sort of out of control of the situation. When the reality is just what you're describing. It's being able to sort of, you know, wrap your head around it, take it in, but then do with it as you wish or do with it as you ought to that, you know, serves you best.
Yeah, and an extreme example of this is the college athlete, and there's many of them, so I won't name a name, but the college athlete who was traumatically injured and let's say wheelchair bound for the rest of their life in the sport. And this person goes around and they're the most radiant, happy person you've ever seen. And they look at their injury as like just a part of the gift of their life, right?
Yeah, no, that's true.
I mean, if that's not a choice, you tell me what is, okay? And it's the exact same idea, because there's going to be another person who has the same kind of an injury, and it's effectively going to end their life. And that's their choice, right? But it's the same event. So this is a very powerful notion. And the way to start to unpack this in your mind is to slow yourself down and ask, what is it that was good that came from this event that I'm not thinking about right now? Let me just make a list of anything that was positive or good from this event. Or let me make a list of anything I learned as a result of this event that's made me a better person. Okay? And if you ask questions like that, you're going to come up with a list of things that's going to start to shift how you frame the memory from this horrible thing into like, wow, I guess, it was bad at the time, but these things came of it. And that's a really, really important shift.
So Malcolm Gladwell actually did a podcast. He has this podcast called Revisionist History. I don't know if you know who Malcolm Gladwell is. He's of
course.
Okay. He did one on Brian Williams. The episode's called Free Brian Williams. And for those of you who don't know who Brian Williams is, he's the guy that is a reporter and said he got shot down in a helicopter crash and all that stuff. And when in reality, the people who were flying the helicopter at the time was like, you were on my flight. We didn't get shot down, and it was just it was one of those, Malcolm Gladwell kind of narrated it as like, okay, so Brian Williams has this event and he's told this story 100 times, 200 times. And over the course of 10 years, he embellishes a little here, embellishes a little here. And after that period, he can't remember, okay, what's real and what's not. And as he's telling the story, it comes out that his plane crashed. And just as you were talking about this and the frame of mind and how memories work and all that stuff, it brought this episode to my forefront, and I thought about it again. And Malcolm Gladwell is actually defending Brian Williams in this episode. So I would, if anyone's listening to this and is kind of interested in how memories work and how your perspective goes, I would strongly recommend checking out this episode. It's episode 4. It's called Free Brian Williams, and it goes really in depth on how our memories can kind of warp and change over time. And based on our point of view and what we're thinking at the time, you could honestly think that something like that could have happened to you. And I don't know, there's been times when I've kind of tried to relate a story that happened to me, and then I sit back and think, well, that didn't actually happen. Or, it's memories are weird. And I just would say, go back, listen to that episode and just check it out. It's really good. Yes. Sorry about
that. So I think the point you're trying to make, though, around this idea is that, basically things are more in our control than we think they are. Yeah. And so much of it has to do with our power to choose. And even sometimes when we feel like the power's been taken away from us, the reality is how we cope with whatever situation, good or bad or indifferent, is really our truth, I guess, to use sort of a modern term, this idea of our truth.
It is. And the Brian Williams story is interesting because that's a case where he was actually telling a story. For most of us, we don't tell the story of our memories. We just hear the voice in our head tell us the story. And that starts to take us in the direction of, again, a lot of what prevents us from getting more of what we want. It's this notion that we tend to listen to the voice that's in our head. And we've got to be aware of that and realize that effectively, just like Brian Williams, we tell ourselves the story of our memory 1 billion times. It's just that we don't speak it to anybody, right? We just ruminate on it. We tell it ourselves over and over and over again. And then it gets changed and evolves over time. And unfortunately for most of us, usually that goes in one direction, which is a direction of negativity or getting worse, right? Rather than a direction of ruminating on something and then having it spiral up and getting much better.
Well, it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're always negative, everything you do is going to be negative. And if that's what you're thinking, of course you're not going to succeed and get your goals done and the things you want to do.
Yeah.
So-
You want a little life hack? I'll give your listeners a little life hack. When you're hanging out with somebody, and by the way, you shouldn't do this, but when you find yourself you shouldn't hang out with people like this habitually. But when you find yourself at a holiday party or at a bar or somewhere, and you're talking to somebody who's really negative, and they're just telling you like what a bad day they had or how bad something is, I always ask the question at an appropriate break in the conversation. I say, so what's the best thing that's happened to you this year? Like the best thing, absolutely best thing, or the best thing that's happened to you today or this week or this quarter or whatever. What is the best thing? And they go,
Huh.
And then they actually answer the question. And guess what happens? It's like all of a sudden they're in a different place.
Well, yeah, it's the first time they've thought of that this year.
Of course, and so it's again as the recipient of somebody else's negativity, you're still in control of how you react and what you can choose to do. And again, the full disclaimer: you shouldn't be hanging out with these people anyway. But we all end up in circumstances where that's unavoidable from time to time.
Yeah.
Well, so I think let's kind of keep mining this path of communication or this part of conversation. So you mentioned that you had some other learnings. I actually want to sort of circle back to this. As I mentioned to you off the air before we got started, one of the things that's been coming up a lot in our lives lately has been this idea of, we're constantly being spewed at by the Gary Vaynerchuks or the Tony Robbins of the world, and everybody's shouting at us all the things that we should do, but so many of us have trouble acting on it. And you happen to be a little bit of an expert in that field. So I want to sort of circle back around and get a few little actionable things out of you at the end.
Sure.
I think that little trick you just shared is awesome, by the way. But let's maybe, you had mentioned you put together a few other learnings that sort of came from this experience of working through this career, being laid off, and sort of having to be in a position to find your own way again.
Yeah, so I'll give you my second gift. Was from my grandpa Ben, my mom's father. And fortunately, I was very, very close to my grandparents growing up, and we saw them multiple times a week, and they were a huge, huge influence in my life. And Grandpa Ben gave me the gift of accelerated success. And I actually tell this story in the book as well, and ended up building a tool around it because it's that important. It's an activator called Change Your Neighborhood. But the gift of accelerated success came from this episode. I was married for about 3 years. I was young in my early to mid 20s, and I was ready to look for my first house with my wife at the time. And my grandfather pulled me aside and he said, "Mark, I have one piece of advice for you about buying a house." He said, "Whatever you do, don't buy the most expensive house in the neighborhood, because there's only one way over time that the other property values can affect your property value if you have the most expensive house in the neighborhood." And I kind of thought about it for a minute, and I thought, wow, okay, you know what? That actually makes sense to me. Great, check it off. And I went off on my way, and we bought our first home, and I took Grandpa Ben's advice, and it was great. It was about 10 years later, in a professional setting. I had started my leadership development training company, and I was a part of a national network of trainers. And we met every 6 months for our own development work. We would have these meetings, actually every quarter. Sorry, we met 4 times a year for our own development and training. And I realized one day that I had become the most expensive house in my professional neighborhood.
Huh.
And that Grandpa Ben was not giving me real estate advice. He was giving me life advice. Because when you are helping others around you, which by the way is a great thing, it's a virtue, but it's because there's no one else around you who's better or more sophisticated or at the next level than you are, then that can only affect your own trajectory in one direction, right? And so it's this idea, the gift of accelerated success, created the concept of the Change Your Neighborhood tool in Activators, which is this idea that you should always be looking to upgrade the level of people who are around you in such a way that it makes you uncomfortable. And I even characterize it, I go so far as to characterize it that you're hanging around with the right people when more than occasionally you're putting your ego at risk by being in the room. They're that good.
Yeah.
They are that good. And we get into these comfort zone networks, where we've been with this group of people for a long time. Could be socially, could be professionally. Professionally, a lot of business owners participate in peer groups or these other groups where they have a forum and they get together periodically and they help each other out. Mastermind groups is another name for this or label for this. And we get comfortable in those groups. And what I have found, especially in my own experience, but also in watching my clients, that we tend not to extricate ourselves from those groups. We just stay there and stay there and stay there, and everybody's kind of at the same place. And what really needs to happen is you need to get out of that and go up and find yourself another group or much more sophisticated people to be around, because that's going to impel you to further success.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. Do you have any, just sort of keeping to the spirit of action or being able to take action on something like this? Like, where, how do you find people that maybe are outside of your, I don't want to call it a class, but, sort of outside of your circle, like to the point you're trying to make, I belong to several different networking groups, and, in these groups, it's typically speaking the same 10 or 12 guys, and it's, they show up every week, and we're all good and reliable, and we all know each other when we see each other, but like not a lot of action coming out of that crowd, right? We don't each level up. Everybody kind of does their own thing, and then we come back and report. But that's kind of the extent of it. We're supposed to be networking. We're supposed to be building new relationships, but nothing really moves.
The problem with a lot of those networking groups is you go to them and everyone's looking out for number one instead of trying to help the person across the table from them. And that, to me, I went to a few of them and I just stopped going because I was like, what's the benefit for me if I'm consistently trying to help people and no one's returning the favor? So
yeah. So Mark, maybe to bring it back to you, are there suggestions for how do you identify these kind of people? Where do you find them? I've met a number of people, especially like through this show and everything. We meet a lot of CEOs and startup founders and things like that. And then when you meet them, you find out they're not necessarily all that much better than you. You're busy putting them on this platform because they're this high-powered CEO or whatever.
Guess how they put their pants on every morning.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so just like you.
With help from Ryan.
That's right. I'm always there to help.
So, you got to be careful when you talk about networking groups or groups, because there's different purposes to different groups. And in a networking group, the purpose of the group is to exchange leads. Okay. In the kind of group I'm talking about, which is a peer forum, the purpose of the group is to help each other get better as a leader in your business. Okay. It's not about exchanging leads or that kind of a thing. Although even in a lead exchange group, the same thing is true. You want to find ways to elevate yourself over time. So what I would suggest around that is you got to think not marginally bigger, but exponentially bigger. Okay. So in other words, it's not like, okay, what's the next level of person that I should meet to help me learn and grow or get leads for my business or whatever. The question is, who are the 10 people in the world or in my country or in my state or in the region of the country that I'm in, that if I could wave a magic wand, I would want to learn from or would want to have a relationship with? That's what I'm talking about, okay? Because, again, you got to put your ego at risk. And if you're not putting your ego at risk, it's not going to pay off the way it should. I'll tell you a story. Are you or your listeners familiar with who Marshall Goldsmith is?
No, I don't know.
Familiar,
okay.
But
So Marshall Goldsmith is like an Uber coach to Fortune 100 CEOs. He's a unbelievably celebrated author. And he's written books like What Got You Here Won't Get You There and Triggers, and he's a great speaker. I mean, in my world and in the world of my clients, he's an epic dude. Okay, a major thinker on coaching, on leadership, and on dealing with people. And so that's Marshall Goldsmith, right? And when I wrote the book, I was asking myself, okay, who is it? Like, if I could wave a magic wand, that I would want to have endorse my book. And Marshall Goldsmith was at the top of that list. Okay. And I didn't know him. I had no contact to him. And so I started putting out to the world, okay, that I wanted to figure out how to get introduced to him. And lo and behold, somebody in my network knew him and was willing to make an introduction. Granted, it was an arm's length introduction. It wasn't like, Mark's the best thing since sliced bread. You got to meet this guy. It's like, hey, I know Mark. I know Marshall. Mark's written a book. He wants to talk to you about it, Marshall. If I'll leave it to the two of you to whatever. And that actually opened the door to me having a series of conversations with him and to getting a written endorsement for my book. And, there's no way that would have happened if I was just thinking incrementally, about who should endorse my book, who are the people I know who I should have endorse my book. And it's a game-changing thing. And the same thing is true with people who are doing the things that you aspire to be doing, because those are the people who you should be coached or mentored by.
I think there's a couple different aspects of it that I'd like to sort of unpack. And one of these is this idea of intention, that you're going after something with purpose. This is something I think a lot of people, I think subconsciously, or when you're told that this is what you should do, people go, oh, okay, yeah, that makes perfect sense. I should do that. But this is maybe one of those things, or one of those blockers that you sort of describe in your book and in other places, that is really difficult for people to sort of act on. And so I wonder if you can talk about that. And two, and sort of around that idea is, I suspect that there's a little bit of maybe it's kind of like an imposter syndrome or something. Like for a lot of times, like if I wanted to meet Mark Cuban, like it probably wouldn't even register with me that Mark Cuban's the guy I should email. You know what I mean? Like he would be so out of my range or so out of my whatever that I don't even know that it would occur to me to reach out to them. And so I think there's, one sort of segment to dig into a little bit, if you don't mind.
Do you want to meet him, by the way?
Of course.
Yeah, is he in your network? I'd be stoked to meet him. I'd fly out for that.
I actually have a client that has the ability to be in touch with him.
Oh,
just
that's
as
awesome.
an aside.
Cool.
And
Love it.
I've met him. I've met him, by the way. So, see, you got to put it out to the world, man.
We just did, and it came right back at us.
Okay, so maybe before I have you go in, maybe this, before we go deep on that subject, maybe this is the other thing I'll suggest. So I commonly say this, and I don't know what this is, but I wouldn't consider myself particularly spiritual. But one thing I will say that has been a certainty in my life and over, as a designer and throughout my career, anytime I've needed work, if I just sort of almost just say it out loud, just sort of like you're saying, put it out into the universe that, God, we really need a project, I got to get some income coming, whatever, like something always kind of manifests. Now, I assume that, if you're a scientist and you're breaking this down, there's some mental decision that's being made that I need to do this and I'm taking steps to achieve it. But it seems to come as if by magic through just that intention. And so I wondered if you could maybe dig in on that a little bit and talk about how that relates to this subject.
Yeah, so there's some really interesting scientific research, social science research around the notion of what we focus on, what we pay attention to, tends to grow in importance to us. Okay, and the classic example is when a friend of yours says, "Hey, you know what? I am in the market for a red convertible.
Yeah.
I'm going to go buy a red convertible." And what's going to happen to you over the course of the next week?
Yeah. No, I'm going through that right now. I'm seeing more Volvos than I've ever seen.
Well, there
on
you
the
go.
road.
So you're gonna see a zillion red convertibles, and you think to yourself at some level, like, "Wow, did I manifest all of these red convertibles? Like they just they're just coming at me, right?" And of course the answer is you didn't. But what's happened is you've created focus, which is increasing the importance to you of noticing the things that are aligned with that focus. And by the way, all this happens unconsciously. Okay, so it's not like you're actually aware of this, and so that's where this idea that if you start putting out into the world this thing that, hey, I'm ready for a client, I need a client, I'm going to have an opening in my portfolio in the next 2 months, and I'm ready to fill it. What that's going to do without you realizing it is impel your unconscious to serve you by starting to notice things that you can act on or do that are aligned with that intention without you even realizing it. Which, and by the way, the flip side of this, and the real issue here is, let's say you've got a different belief system. And the thought is, well, it's going to take me forever to get my next client.
Self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. So guess what you're going to start paying attention to unconsciously? You're going to start paying attention to all the things that are delaying your ability to get a client. Okay.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I've been there.
And then that becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy. And so this isn't like woo-woo secret, stuff. It's actually pretty easy to understand mechanisms of the way our brains operate. But when you gain this insight that what we focus on grows in importance to us, it brings us back to why it's so darn important to focus on the right things. And that brings us back to things like purposefulness, or having clear goals, or having a great attitude about things, or choosing how you react to things. And the list goes on and on and on, because what we're doing is we're then priming our unconscious to serve us by elevating the importance of those things.
Yeah, no, I think that makes perfect sense. And it's funny because a lot of the things that you're sharing, and, honestly, it's a lot of things that you hear if you run around YouTube and you look around for motivational peeps.
We covered the car bit, like, you think of a car you want to buy and all of a sudden it's there. We talked about that with Damien a few weeks ago.
Yeah. It's really interesting. And so I think, oh, crap.
I threw you off, sorry.
Yeah, can I tie this into a business application?
I would love that.
Yeah. So I tell my clients this all the time. The number one role of a leader is to call people's attention to what's most important. That's it. That's all you need to know. Okay. What do I mean by that? Well, why do we have a strategy for a business? Because it's decisions that determine what's important to us, right? Why do we have core values? Because it's what's important to us. Why do we have goals and priorities? It's what's important to us, right? Why do we have procedures or a policy or any of the things we do, right? It's because we're transmitting what's important to us. And this is another extension of the red convertible conversation. Because if, as a leader, I am very, very good at communicating what's important to me in the form of strategy, clear objectives, clear values for the organization, like all of these things that are crystal clear, it's priming everybody in my organization to unconsciously be on the lookout for those things and to be acting in accordance with those things.
So how do you, as a, as someone as a leadership role, define what's important for the business? Is it all based off of, spreadsheets and data and then try and hone in on that? Or is it just gut feelings and kind of, especially in the early days, I bet there's not a lot of data to kind of go off of to, we need to change this. You've only been in business for 2 months. How do you know?
That's usually how it starts. There's a big continuum of that, and frankly, there's no right answer. You start where you are, and then over time, you want to get more rigorous as you go and be more data driven as you go. And I've worked with clients over the years at every point on the on that continuum. But you can only operate at the level and sophistication of where you are, not where you wish you were. And then you need to grow into it over time.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense.
And by the way, hire a great coach. That's another way to get help with that.
Sure.
Cool. Okay, so let's circle back around. Like I say, this stuff is like gold. So I want to keep working through this list of these gifts that you've received as a part of this backstory. However, as we get a little longer in this thing, like I still want to turn it around. So let's rock through a couple more of these, and then we can maybe delve into some sort of action items.
All right, sure. So we'll stay on the theme of purpose, if that's okay.
Sure.
Purposefulness, and I got the gift of purpose from my father. Okay. Unfortunately, posthumously. But I did. So my dad passed away in October of 2000, and we on the day of his funeral, we were in the house with my mom and my brothers and all of our family and friends, and we had this giant spread of food, and it was after the funeral, and everybody was kind of talking and remembering and all of that, and and he, by the way, he died suddenly, so it was unexpected. And I was standing with a small group of my friends near the front door of my parents' house, and one of them asked me. He said, "Mark, what was your dad really like?" Because he didn't know. These are adult friends, not friends I grew up with. And I thought about it and took a breath and was about to speak and answer when the doorbell rang. And we were closest to the door, so I walked over and opened the door, and the UPS man was standing there in his uniform, but oddly he didn't have a package. And so I opened the door and I said hi, and he said hi. He said, "I just want to let you know, your father was a really, really great man."
What was the experience with the UPS?
Oh, wait a minute,
Yeah,
right? Like literally, so you can imagine me on the day we buried my dad, answering the door and having the UPS man say this to me. And he went on and said, in the summer, he would always offer me a cold drink and want to see how I was doing. And in the winter, he would always offer me a cup of tea or a coffee or a cookie or something, because he really cared. And he leaned in and he said, "Nobody does that, but your father did. And I just want you to know that."
Huh.
And so I invited him in. I said, "Look, I'm sure my father would appreciate you being here." And he said, "No, I gotta go. I gotta continue on my route." And so I closed the door, like tears streaming down my face. And my friends are standing there, having witnessed this exchange. And I said, "That's what you need to know about my father."
Huh.
And so my father had a sense of purpose. His legacy, what he was remembered for, was that he took care of people. And as I took this episode and kind of thought back over his life and my experience with him, it was always that. He always was other-minded, right? Always had other people, took care of people. And it underscored this idea of having a purpose, because, ultimately there's going to be nothing left of us.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going to be left of us is what other people remember of us, or what kind of work we leave behind. And we can actually control that. And so my father gave me the gift of purposefulness. And it was this idea of clarifying our purpose, my purpose, so that I have a better chance of actually leaving behind something of my choosing rather than just whatever, as I kind of bounce through my life. And when you then dig into moving away from the story and going more toward purposefulness, you start to dig into that. you realize that an emotional why, the emotion behind the why you're doing something, which is the purpose, the purposefulness, is one of the most powerful motivators that exists. And so, Ryan, this is kind of coming around to answer the question, which is that purposefulness in and of itself, when it's done right and it's used properly, can be a very, very powerful impetus to do the things that must be done to get you where you want to go.
Is that based off of like your core values for the business or the mission statement? Is that kind of honing in on your purpose, or is it? I mean, because I've been working with a coach recently the last couple months, and he's been working on this kind of stuff with me, and it's very helpful to have a target to aim at. Like when you have an idea of exactly what you're trying to work on and what your goals are, is right now it's more on a personal level, and we're kind of working on the business itself, and having that target, that thing to throw at, and the goal and the objective to go for it, it's night and day. It changes everything. And it's funny how I've been doing this for 20 years and finally figured that out.
But thank God you're getting it now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the gift.
Well,
better now than never, right?
I think for me the biggest problem is I'm a habitual solopreneur. Like I've never had partners. I've never had people I've had to work with. It's always just been me doing my thing, and getting into an environment where I have to talk to people, I have to work with other people, I have to do, stuff that comes with owning a business and managing people. It's changing things, and it's kind of cool, but scary as hell at the same time.
Yeah. So go back and answer your question. Purpose usually comes from the entrepreneur. It's not the purpose of the business usually is the purpose of the entrepreneur. Okay. And it's got to be aligned. So it's not like you sit a whole bunch of people in a smoky room and they discover the purpose of the business that they're running, because there's actually not any emotion behind that. It's about their story and about their life and about what they want, and that usually becomes the purpose of the business. And there's a process to go through to get there. I actually have an Uncover Your Life's Purpose tool in Activators. So all the tools and assessments from my book Activators are available for free download in writable PDFs on my website, which is activators.biz. And so like the Change Your Neighborhood tool, the Leverage Your Past tool, the Life's Purpose tool, the things we're talking about here, these tools are actually available for free download on the website. Of course, I'd love you to buy the book, which you should do. Or
is it available on Amazon?
Yeah, it's on Amazon, Audible,
Amazon,
everywhere good books are sold.
Yeah, the whole 9 yards. Kindle, a soft cover, and Audible. Yeah.
Can we kind of break that down? Writing the book, what made you decide to do it? How long it took? Have you written any other books? Because we've talked to a few people who've written books, and their processes are all different. Like some people talk into their phone and have it kind of transcribe it for them. Some people don't, and they just type it all out. How was your process?
Yeah, so let me answer this question, and then we're going to go back to Ryan because I want to make sure I give him what he's looking for.
I see how it is. I'm not on board.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry.
Chopped liver over here.
Yeah, that's all right. So Activators, so I resisted writing a book for a long time. I had people whispering in my ear for years, when are you going to write a book? You should write a book. You should write a book. And the problem I had with that was I was witnessing a lot of people I knew who were writing books that was sort of their regurgitation of somebody else's stuff.
Yep.
Okay. It wasn't additive to the dialogue. It wasn't different, and it wasn't additive to the dialogue. And I was bound and determined to not do that. And that's why I resisted, because I felt like I didn't have anything new to say. And it was about 2.5 years ago, actually maybe 3 years ago now, that the light bulb finally went off. And I realized the inception, the idea of the inception of Activators, right? Which is, why is it that even though we know what to do and how to do it generally, we still just don't get it done? Okay. And I see this happening in leadership and business, like with people in their personal life, like everywhere. And it's the thing. And I knew that I had elements to the answers, and I also knew there was a lot of research to support it, and that's what kind of opened up the idea of the project for this book. And it turned out there really wasn't a lot out there that wasn't an academic work. There wasn't a lot out there that was practical, like with tools, like something you could actually do with this on this topic. And so that's where I kind of greenlighted the idea. The way I went about it was to work with a writing partner. And ironically, I'm actually a pretty good writer, but the problem is I'm not very disciplined at it, and I'm a much better speaker, train of thought speaker. Okay, and so I found a writing partner, and the way we work is I frame up the chapter and do my research and all that kind of stuff, and she and I have a phone call, which she records. And I basically kind of speak through the main points of the chapter. I'm not actually narrating it. I'm just kind of giving her the framework, the very, very detailed framework, the story I want to tell, the piece of research to pull in here, the thing there. And she's just amazing at turning it into a written work, which I then subject to moderate editing. And then we kind of go back and forth, and the process worked really, really well for me. So that was the process for Activators. I'm actually working. So this was my first book. I'm actually working on a project right now that unfortunately I'm not at liberty to talk about. that is on the topic of accountability that is also going to be a published work at some point, hopefully before the end of this year, as a matter of fact.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I have to have you back on when it comes up.
Well, cool. So I think that all the stuff that you're talking about, even just describing the process of the book, really, I mean, having this little bit of backstory through these gifts sort of helps explain, why you were where you were when it was time to write the book, and how you, just being deliberate about, making sure you're being additive and stuff like that. Like, so many people don't have that check or balance in their system. But by my count, I think we're at about 4 gifts so far, and I believe there's a couple more that we could get into real quick if you've got time.
Sure. All right. I'll tell you a funny one. And by the way, this story has never made the light of day before. So this is the debut. This is the debut of the story, and it's thanks to you guys because you forced me to think about these gifts in advance, right? So my mother, my mom, who's now 80, I'm going to get this wrong. She's 86, I think. Doing well. She gave me the gift of curiosity. And when we were little kids, she was a school teacher. And so that was how she was wired. And when we were little kids, she used to cultivate all these experiences for us just because they were interesting. Like I remember once so the city of White Plains is a small city that's about 15 or 20 minutes from where I grew up. And when I was a really, really little kid, I remember once we went with my mom to White Plains because she had read in the newspaper that on that particular morning, they were going to be hoisting a giant air conditioning unit by crane up to the top of a newly built building. And she just brought us down to watch it for no reason other than it's interesting and it's not something you would normally see. Right. So there was always curiosity. She was always taking us to shows and to things. And so the funny story, the funny story is, so when Saturday Night, this is really going to date me, by the way. So when Saturday Night Fever came out, I think like mid 1970s, John Travolta, right? I was probably 11 years old, and my older brother Ron was probably 14. My mother decided that she heard that the movie has really good music and really good dancing. Now, mind you, this was an R-rated movie in the mid-70s, okay? And so she decided to take my brother Ron and I to the movie and left my younger brother Eric home with my father because he was too little anyway, right? So here I am, sitting. My mom is sitting in between my brother and I. We're watching Saturday Night Fever. I'm 11. The movie has some scenes where, there's women in a strip club dancing on a thing, and topless, and it's an R-rated movie, right?
Yeah,
it's not a big deal.
You're loving it.
It's not a big deal now, but in the mid 70s to an 11-year-old, right? Yeah. It was like, so of course. So now, what could possibly be worse than sitting next to your mother, watching a woman dance topless in a strip club on a movie screen? Okay, and I challenge you. What could actually be worse than that?
Yeah, that's
because by the way, because I'm about to tell you what could be worse than that. Okay, here's what's worse than that. In the middle of that scene, what does my mom do? She hits me and my brother in the shoulder like that and says, "That's just how your father likes him." That's what's worse than sitting next to your mom watching a movie like that.
That's awesome.
Great.
But again, we were there because of her willingness to expose us to things and this cultivation of curiosity and having experiences. And so my mom gave me the gift of curiosity, which, by the way, makes me an awesome coach because all I do is sit around and ask questions all day. Because that's usually what kind of opens things up for people or causes people to shift off a position or see something in a new light. And I really trace that back to, growing up with my mom.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's a super funny story. I'm glad you shared it with us. So, and super awkward. I feel bad for a younger you. So, but nonetheless, that's awesome.
I turned out okay, but
Yeah, everything worked out okay. And this is a fun one to bring up every now and then, I'm sure. So, okay. So, are there any other gifts that you'd like to share, or should we transition into
let's round it out, because what I'd like to do is share with you a few techniques around how to change your behavior. Okay, because this is really the gist, I think, Ryan, of what you were asking.
Well, that would be great, because I am notoriously sticky and I have a really hard time pivoting, and it's funny because like the common thread in a lot of these things that you're bringing up, I mean, a lot of these aren't, these aren't, something that you've solved by way of writing a thesis or becoming a doctor or whatever. Like, I mean, these are common, like human experiences, these ideas. And we're being shouted at, I pick on Gary Vaynerchuk a lot, but I mean, we're constantly being yelled at because of, everybody with a YouTube channel these days has got a motivational story they're trying to share. And it's constant battery of things. And I think a lot of times we go out looking for answers all the time. And no matter how many times we hear it, we never act on them. And I'm guilty of this. I mean, a lot of people I know are guilty of this. And it's also, a tool or a thing that I'm trying to overcome myself just personally in different projects that I'm working on, being able to hear instruction and then move on that instruction. Because I think that there's some sort of invisible barrier or some sort of trepidation or something that keeps us from hearing something then doing something if we've never done that before. Like we just don't have the experience of walking that path. So even though he says that's the path, why won't we go down it? And so I think it's really interesting how all these gifts play pieces and parts of that, as if it's like an orchestra or something. And these are all people, each of these different aspects of your life in this situation are contributing to this, and having all of these things in your arsenal will allow you to take action.
Yeah. So you just tripped over a coachable moment.
Good.
I can bring you back and ask a question. You said,
all right, let me grab my checkbook.
We're looking for the answers, right? And my question is, where do we tend to look for the answers?
Well, it seems to be YouTube these days, but it's always elsewhere. It's never inside. Yeah, it's always out.
There you go. And where should we be looking for the answers? And the answer is in the mirror, right? And so it's that's the fallacy of all the stuff that's going on out there. Because, and again, it's why I wrote this book, because we know what to do. We know what to do. I mean, I do this with when I speak to a room full of CEOs. I'll play this out for them, and I'll say, I'll pick somebody up in the front row, and I'll say, hey, look, if I told you that in 24 hours tomorrow morning you need to give a half an hour presentation on how to create an awesome strategy for your business, and I told you that in the next 24 hours you could use any resource at your disposal. You could use the internet, you could call people on the phone, anybody any book you can access, like whatever. And all you need to do is teach how to do great strategy in 24 hours for 30 minutes to a room full of CEOs. How do you think you would do with that? And the answer is always, oh, I could totally do that, right? And of course, that's the moment that I sort of
invite them on the stage,
grab them by the collar and shake them and say, well, then how come you don't have a strategy in your business, right? And it's like, it's because it's all there, it's not here. Okay. And so as we get into this behavior change stuff, it's really important to acknowledge that looking for the answer out there is a fool's errand. It is a fool's errand. You already know everything you need to know. You got to look in here, and you got to become a student of how your mind works and how we behave as humans. Okay. Because that's ultimately the key to getting rid of anything that's in your way. That's the thing. So let's talk about behavior change here a little bit. There's two ways to change your behavior. You can think your way into being, or you can be your way into thinking. Now, let's start with think your way into being. You've heard, I'm sure, of affirmation, right? Sure. Or positive thought. You repeat to yourself, right? So this is this idea that, if I think enough of the right things, repeated over time, I will then embody those things and be able to do the behaviors that are associated with those things, right? That's kind of the think your way into being mode of behavior change. So there's good news and there's bad news. The good news is it actually will work. Okay, it actually will work. The bad news is it takes a lot of energy, a lot of discipline, and a lot of time for it to actually work. which brings us to mode number 2, be your way into thinking. The good folks at Nike, loud and proud there, Ryan, on your
That's
shirt.
right. Represent.
So there you go.
Looking for
the good
sponsors,
folks at Nike say, just do it, right? And that's what be your way into thinking is. It's this idea that if you just do the behavior, okay, and you do it repeatedly over time you will come to think in the way that you need to think that will then make that sustainable. Now, for those of you playing along at home, you might be the little voice in your head. Remember, the voice is probably saying, whoa, 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 whoa. What if I don't know how to do the thing? What if I'm like really intimidated or scared by the thing? What if like, da, 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 da. I'm not saying it's easy. Okay. I'm not saying it's easy, but if you do the thing and you screw it up, and then you do the thing again, and you screw it up, and you do the thing again, and you screw it up a little less, and you do the thing again, and you screw it up a little less, you start to get into a mode of accelerated learning. This gets to, again, what happens inside. It's accelerated learning, and you will very rapidly get over the curve and then adopt the mindset because you will have been successful at doing that thing. The other benefit of this process is you actually get results a lot sooner because you're not waiting months for some magic moment to occur when you can pick up the phone, okay, and ask for Mark Cuban, but rather you start picking up the phone today, okay, and you start that process today. And so it's a very, very important thing. And so then the question is, all right, well, so how do I start to be my way into thinking? The easiest way is you find somebody who does what you want to do. Find somebody who does what you want to do. So if you know somebody who, let's say you want to get better at cold calling and sales. It's a great example. Okay, great. Go find the person you know who's the best at cold calling and sales, whoever that is. I don't care. Okay, and sit down and talk to them and say, when you cold call, tell me, what do you actually do? What's the behavior that you do? Tell me step by step how you make a cold call. What do you do? And then tell me, before you start cold calling, what's on your mind? What are you actually thinking about? When you're dialing the number, what do you think about then? And when the phone is ringing, what's in your mind that you're thinking about? And while you're on the phone with somebody, what do you think? And when you get rejected, what do you think about? Okay, and then what do you do next? Okay, and if you really get the information of how an expert handles themselves in the behavior. And again, it's not just of course, I dial the phone. That's the behavior. And then I read my script. That's what I do. That's not the answer. The answer is what's going on inside that's going to give me the insight into how a great cold caller thinks, not what they do. Okay? You need the do, but you need the think too, right?
Sure.
And that's the most straightforward way to then roll up your sleeves and actually start doing the behavior. And if you think about it, how did you learn how to ride a bike?
You did it.
You didn't write affirmation cards and sit around for 6 months and say, I'm on a two-wheeler. I could be on a two-wheeler.
I was going to say, in my defense, I did try that. It wasn't effective. Eventually, I had to do it the other way.
There you go. So be your way into thinking is a great behavioral technique that just sort of dispenses with all the BS and gives you a very straight path. And again, we're relying on the knowledge of an expert. Kind of sounds like Change Your Neighborhood a little bit, right? Because that pattern is in this conversation here, that the same old people don't necessarily get you different results. So the other behavior change technique I want to share with you is this. There was a study done in Germany in 2001 where there was a group of people who were in a drug rehab facility, and they were getting ready to graduate the facility and go get jobs, okay, productive jobs in society. And the researchers came in on the day that they were supposed to write their resumes as part of the drug rehab program to get ready to get jobs. And they took the patients in the rehab and they divided them into two groups. One group, they said, look, you got to get your resumes done and turned in by the end of the day today. The other group, they said, what we want you to do is take this piece of paper and write down on the piece of paper, when I finish my lunch today, then I will work on my resume. And by the way, we want you to get your resumes in by the end of the day today. That's it. That was the only difference, okay? They wrote down, when I finish my lunch today, then I am going to work on my resume, okay? Here's the amazing thing. 0%, 0% of group number one handed in their resumes at the end of the day. That's probably not a big surprise, right?
Sure.
Okay. Would you like to hazard a guess as to what percent of group number two handed in their resumes?
I'd say above 80.
80, exactly. 80. Now, by
the
the
only
way,
change was giving them a time frame to go off of, right? Was saying, hey,
no,
this
having them write down what's called an if, when, then statement.
Oh, okay.
And that's the hack. But the amazing 80 is remarkable.
Yeah.
It's not like going from 0 to 40%, which would have been impressive, or 0 to 60%, which would have been really impressive. 0 to 80%? Are you kidding me? That's astoundingly impressive.
By changing one thing.
Yeah, astoundingly impressive. And so the insight here is this construct of if, when, then. And, Ryan, it gets back to this idea of intentions, creating an intention for something, okay? And the if, when, then statement is very, very powerful because it is us making a commitment to ourselves in writing. Okay? So, for example, let's bring this into day-to-day life. You're on a diet, you want to lose weight, you're going out to a nice dinner, you're bound and determined not to order dessert, but every time you go to a restaurant, you always order dessert, okay? And so what do? You write an if, when, then statement that says, when the waiter asks if I would like dessert, I will reply no and ask for a cup of coffee. Okay?
You already prepared mentally for not doing it.
And again, what that does is none of these things are foolproof, but if you look at the data, it stacks the deck in favor of you then choosing to behave consistently with your commitment to yourself. And that's the insight here that's really, really powerful. And so that's the behavior change technique that, again, for the thing that you should do that you can't quite seem to do, there's two things I would recommend based on our conversation today. One is uncover the real purpose of why it's important to you. Okay? Uncover the real purpose. My wife and I about 3 years ago, just over 4 years ago now, wow, almost 5 years ago, decided we were going to completely change our lifestyle. We were both not in great shape. We were both a little bit overweight, actually quite a bit overweight. Fortunately, physically, we were both fine. There was no event or emergency that happened, but we just, drew a trajectory line of our lives and said, not where do we want to be in 5 years, but where do we want to be in 30 years or 40 years? And the trajectory line was not good based on where we were then. And so we made this commitment. And the first thing I did was uncover the real purpose. And my wife and I have a beautiful lake house. I live in New Jersey. We have a beautiful lake house down in Virginia. And I created this kind of vision in my mind of this idea of a long lake life. Okay, this idea that we want to be healthy and vital and happy and active for like a long freaking time together. Okay, and I kind of branded that the long lake life, LLL, right? Mm-hmm. And that became my purpose. Like that was the purpose, not my life's purpose, but the purpose of my physical transformation. Okay. And that was super, super powerful. So if you want to change something that's hard, first define the real emotional why. Okay. Not like, oh, I have to do this because the doctor said I have to do this, or I should lose weight. That's why. There's no emotion there, right? It's got to make your skin tingle. You got to get goosebumps, right? Get the hair on the back of your neck standing up, or it makes you want to cry. Like this long lake life concept for me used to make me almost cry. Okay, it was that powerful for me. And then use a technique like an if, when, then statement, okay, to actually start the process of, in small steps, changing some of your behaviors. And start small. Don't start big.
Mm-hmm. It's micro goals,
Okay. Because what will happen is you will build momentum and then be able to take bigger chunks as you go from there. And so, Ryan, I hope this is addressing your question in terms of putting a couple of pieces together from the conversation today into a very clear, here are two things that you can do in combination that can have a powerful effect on helping you do the thing that you know you should do, but you're just not doing it.
Yeah, no, I think that was really great, and put a nice little bow on this whole thing because, like I said, I mean, personally, in trying to develop my business, I had come off a more recent layoff off of a large consulting gig, and basically was put back into a situation where my wife said, basically, you have to make this business work. We're tired of being at the whim of every ad agency, so you're not going back to work for them. You have to make this work. And that, pushed me into a trajectory that sort of changed the way that I do business now and the way that I think and the way that I communicate and all these different things. And, we're still working on it. We're fixing a lot of, sins of the past, but we're working through it. And so as I'm, doing this looking outward because, what would I know? I'm too insecure to believe that I have it inside. So I go looking to everybody else. But the common thing that I discovered is that, here's everybody barking at me all this stuff. They have, the whole internet worth of wisdom at our fingertips. And I can't seem to turn that into anything. Like, I mean, no matter what people are saying. And to your point, well, and even to what I was saying earlier about sort of just putting ideas out into the universe and then things manifest, which we sort of have talked about as more to do with focus than anything. I mean, that wasn't some technique I pulled off the internet. I mean, that, this idea that, just sort of say out loud you need work and let people know that you want to work is like kind of enough. But I just knew to do that intrinsically. I didn't need to go seek that out. Tony Robbins didn't give me that nugget. So anyway, I think, to just sort of wrap this conversation up neatly, I think that was a perfect way to go out. So with that, Mark, we really appreciate having you on the show today. The idea of all these gifts and things was really great. This was a fun way to put everything together. So thank you so much for your time. Sorry for the technical faux pas. But nonetheless, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Yeah, really. I really appreciated the conversation, and it's kind of like driving home a lot of the things I've already kind of learned. And, hearing that second input, not from the guy I've been talking with already, just from another person, and you're kind of like, yeah, he knows what he's talking about. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that little bit of affirmation is always helpful.
That's great. Hey, would you mind if I plugged the book really fast
and
told your listeners where they could find me?
Yeah, absolutely. So, where can people find you?
So the book is called Activators, a CEO's Guide to Clearer Thinking and Getting Things Done. As we mentioned, it's on softcover on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible as well. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Coach Mark Green. You can also go to activators.biz, which is the book website for free tools and the downloads of all the tools. And you can also find me at mark-green.com on the web of webs.
All right, killer. Yeah, no, and we will we'll share all that information in the show notes. So anybody tuning in or checking this out, we'll have all that information with the show. Yeah, I guess that's it, man. Perfect pod. Thanks, man. We really appreciate your time. That was awesome. Thank you.
My pleasure, guys. Great to be with you.
Stay in touch.
Have a great night.